everybody. And we got a smaller, intimate group today, but that's okay. Some of these are going to be very specific questions that have been asked in previous webinars. And we have 3 folks here I have listed on the screen, and I'll let each person do their own intro here. Starting with Brad Schacht. Brad, if you want to go ahead and give your own little intro of yourself.
Yeah, I'm Bradley Schacht. I'm a senior consultant here at Pragmatic Works. I do mainly BI work and APS work now, so I'll be talking a little bit about the cloud and SharePoint side of things as well there.
Cool. And you can see Brad's contact information on the slide in front of you. It's at Bradley Schacht is his Twitter, and bschacht@pragmaticworks.com is his email. And Anthony, can you go ahead as well?
Yeah, great. So Anthony Martin here. I'm a solutions architect at Pragmatic Works. Like Brad, I also specialize in enterprise business intelligence and predictive analytics. But I also work with our customers from both a pre-sales and a post-sales type engagement.
Cool. And you can see Anthony's contact information on the screen as well. He's, if you follow Twitter, he's at SQL Martini. That's an awesome Twitter name. And finally, myself, my name is Devin Knight. I'm the training director at Pragmatic Works, so anything training related, I usually work through it at some level. You can see my contact information on the screen as well. So our plan for today is really to have these 3 gentlemen, including myself, to talk a bit about some questions that people have specifically about Power BI. We've taken a few through our polls, and we've also curated some from previous webinars that we thought were particularly interesting. So maybe a little bit different session than you're used to. We're already getting some questions come in here as well, but maybe some different type of webinar than you're used to. We're only going to go about 30 minutes, so that's a pretty lengthy amount of time to do questions anyways, but we do have some questions already taken care of. But definitely a different type of session. We're going to start with questions and have exclusively questions for this webinar. So the first question that I have for the group, and I'll be monitoring, Brad's monitoring, and Anthony is as well, the questions coming in via the chat. The first question I have today is for Brad. And we get this actually question quite a bit lately, and it has to do with Macs and Apple devices here. And the question is, what kind of support does Power BI have for Macs? That's for you, Brad.
So there's a little bit of a disconnect between the Office suite on the Mac side and the Office suite on the Windows side. So the challenge that you're going to run into with the Macs is that on the Excel side, you don't have the full Excel support for things like Power Pivot, Power Query, Power View, those type of things inside the Office suite over on the Mac side. The great thing about Power BI, though, is a lot of the way that Power BI is moving, and with the designer and everything, and PowerBI.com, and even SharePoint in general, is that once you get the actual data model created and everything, and you deploy that out to a SharePoint environment or a PowerBI.com, it doesn't really matter what platform you're on. So you can still do some Power View development inside of the web browser on a Mac. You just can't do it inside of Excel. The other thing that's kind of nice about the way that Microsoft is going with things is that the mobile story there is very strong. So while this isn't really Mac specific, I think it's kind of something important to call out here, is that a lot of companies and a lot of people use iOS devices. And so what you'll notice on PowerBI.com is, and if you go out to the Mac or the Apple iOS App Store and everything, is that you can actually go and download some iOS apps to view the Power View right on your mobile devices. So while again it's not necessarily a Mac thing there are some mobile apps. Currently they only have iOS apps. There is Android and Windows Phone apps in development there. So I'd be on the lookout for those coming down the pipeline. But just in general, Microsoft has really taken the approach of where people are really using their devices, the types of devices that people are really using is really what they're focusing on. So Mac so much not in the enterprise, but iOS devices are out there in a lot of different places, and web browsers even. Macs use Chrome a lot of Mac users use Chrome. A lot of Windows users even use Chrome. So there's very good support there across all platforms.
Yeah, I think it's funny. Most of the demos, this is Devin here. This is most of the demos you see Microsoft doing now. They actually are doing it through Chrome. So I don't know if it's to show you the fact that they can do a lot of the things that you would want to do in Chrome, or if they're really just like Chrome that much more. A lot of the demos you see done by Microsoft people now are certainly done through Chrome and Mac devices now. So there's obviously a realization here that Mac, as far as mobile, is a winner, especially with the people that have the pocket, the purse to spend money on things.
Yeah, absolutely. We see a lot when we go to customer sites. We see a lot of the upper level management folks too. They use a lot of iPads and a lot of iOS devices. That seems to be the real winner in that space. So I expect to see them to continue to put money into development on that side. Again, not necessarily OS 10 Mac so much, but definitely the mobile side for sure.
Great. So you brought up PowerBI.com. I did bring PowerBI.com up on the screen here. You should be able to see. Brad mentioned the Power BI app for iOS, which does work on iPads and as well as iPhones. So I have that on the screen here. If you're interested in that, just go to PowerBI.com and go underneath Download. You'll find it listed there. We do have quite a few questions coming in. I will make sure that we do address those. We should have time. I have some preset questions, but I will grab some questions from the audience here as well. Let's go ahead and go to the next one. I think the next one is for myself, and it looks like this one might overlap a little bit with, I see Joseph's question in here, so I'll ask Joseph's question as part of this as well. So the question I have on the screen here is what is the future for multidimensional cubes with Power BI? And to kind of tie in Joseph's question here, his question is why does Microsoft provide multiple overlaps solutions for BI, such as MDX, DAX, Power Query, Power View, SAS, SSRS. DAX was out just a few years ago, and now we have Power Query, Power View. Will Microsoft have something new in 2 to 3 years? How do we adapt to such a changing thing? So and kind of integrate that in with this question a bit as well. So the future of multidimensional cubes, and first of all, let me say this. 10 years ago, put yourself back 10 years ago, Microsoft was telling everyone, hey, you need to start doing multidimensional cubes, you need to start doing multidimensional cubes, you need to start doing multidimensional cubes. Then finally, as people got over that learning curve of understanding what's the use case of this, why do I really need that, why do I need multidimensional cubes, and they actually started building them out, a lot of new technologies came out to go along with Joseph's question. A lot of new technologies have come out since then that maybe don't necessarily mean that you need to have multidimensional cubes. And so a lot of people have the question is, can I connect to my cubes that I have built over the last 10 years in Power BI? And if not, why not? And is it going to have that connectivity to come, or what's the story there? So first of all, multidimensional cubes are not going away, so don't think that's going to happen. There is certainly some features that exist in multidimensional cubes, the ones that you've been creating over the last 10 years, that does not exist in Power BI or in Tabular. There are features that are specific to multidimensional. So don't be fearful that all the development time you spent in the past is going to be negated. Now, as far as Power BI goes, currently there's limited connectivity to multidimensional cubes. So if you're thinking about Power BI as it exists today, so you might hear Anthony, myself, and Brad talk about Power BI today versus Power BI in the future because there's a lot of new stuff coming out in the next 6 months to a year. So you'll hear us kind of differentiate those things. But multidimensional cubes today, here's what you can do with them. First of all, in Excel, you cannot connect to multidimensional cubes in Excel to create things like Power View reports on top of. What you can do, and there might be some limited scenarios where you may want to do this, is you can pull in multidimensional cube data into Power Pivot and then create reports on it. Now, the reasons why you may consider doing that is if you have a multidimensional cube but you want to be able to add some other features into it that don't exist, and say for example you're more of an analyst type and you don't have time to wait for IT to add it in, then you can do some of your own ad hoc analysis inside Power Pivot and then build Power View reports on top of it. So currently the short answer for that is as of today, if you're doing Excel, Excel does not have connectivity in the multidimensional cubes for Power View reporting. Of course, you can connect to multidimensional cubes inside of Excel and do pivot tables. That's been around there for years. But Power View is a big question people have. That does not work in Excel today. Now, good news is there's Excel 2016 right around the corner, and that capability will be there in 2016. So you'll have that there. As far as the new Power BI that's coming out, the Power BI preview, that's at PowerBI.com. Currently, there is a connectivity to analysis services, but it's really focused. Excuse me. It's really focused in on tabular models right now. And from the word I'm hearing, that will be changed pretty soon, where multidimensional cubes will be connected as well. Now, to kind of come full circle to Joseph's question, what's going to be around in the next 2 to 3 years? Seems like there's always so much changing here. How do you adapt to this? Certainly, education is going to be a big part of it for you because it's going to continue to change. There's going to be some new technology that comes out It's going to be the telepathy, I'm just kidding, the telepathy kind of source here where you can pull data right out of your brain. I don't know, something like that. It's always going to be some kind of thing that you'll need to adapt to. Luckily, the new stuff that's coming out, you're seeing that the learning curve is much easier. Think about compare MDX to DAX. Certainly, DAX is a lot easier than MDX. So the learning curve on a lot of these new things is much less steep than they have been. And to be honest, it's not too different than what you've dealt with over probably your long career, where things are constantly changing. You're always going to have to learn something new, or you'll get left behind a bit. So, long-winded answer for that. Did you want to add something to that?
No, I think you did a nice job explaining it.
Okay, cool. Now the next one here, oh, that's why you were meeting. The next question's for you. So the next question here is for Anthony, and we'll kind of add things to each other's questions as we go here. It has to do with security. So the question is, how can security be applied to Power BI? Go ahead, Anthony.
Great, thanks, Devin. So security, great question. I suppose the first place that I would say that security can be applied is directly through the data sources. So the data sources that you're actually going to be consuming, say it's a relational database or it's some sort of web service. Obviously, whatever credentials that you're using to connect to that, that's the first initial security layer. The second security layer is going to be once you create that Power BI solution through the Excel add-ins. The scalability story typically goes you either deploy that to SharePoint on-premise or SharePoint online, and that's where the next level of security can be defined. So who should have access to see or view, consume the visualizations that have been created in that solution. And then the next level in terms of scalability is going to be something called row-level security. So how do I get beyond just who can see a given solution or not, but if I want to expose a single model, and inside of that single model I only want the user that's accessing it to see the data that they've been given access to. So the typical scenario that I talk about here is, say you're in a sales organization, and maybe that's broken out by geography, and you're part of, let's say, the Northeast region. Maybe that specific user that's accessing it from the Northeast region should only be able to see their sales, and the user that ends up accessing it from the Southwest region can only see their sales. That type of security solution we often refer to as row-level security, and that would be provided by upscaling a Power Pivot solution, which is that in-memory cube semantic layer, to analysis services tabular, and then you have those additional bells and whistles that you can apply that row-level security through DAX expressions.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so there's a lot of different security things you should be considerate about, whether it's data or just access to files. Yeah, I think you covered that pretty well. You want to have anything to add to that, Brad?
No, I think you covered it pretty well.
All right, so the next question here is for Brad, and I am kind of curating the questions here as you guys are asking them. I'm trying to see if one really will apply as we go, but we will definitely answer them regardless at the end here. Next question for Brad here is, when will, and you're going to have a great answer for this. This was a question that we had in one of our webinars, but there's a good answer that was just made available today or yesterday. When will DAX be supported in the new Power BI Designer?
Well, as of today, I believe, they actually have added support for DAX calculations inside the Power BI Designer. So it's a little bit of a limited support functionality at this current time, but you can go in now. Once you download that new Power BI Designer preview there, you can go in and you can create calculations just like you would inside of your Power Pivot model. So there's only functionality, like I said, currently to create calculations. You can't do calculated columns or anything like that. If you go out and you look on there's a support page though for the Power BI Designer out there on the PowerBI.com site, and you can actually go through and see which features they're working on, which features people have suggested, which ones they've already completed. And if you comb through there, eventually you'll find several asks in there about DAX. So it is listed as a planned feature currently. There's a lot of votes for it, so I would assume that's one of those big misses kind of in the Power BI Designer right now. And something to keep in mind as we talk about the Power BI Designer throughout this whole session today, something to keep in mind there is that is still in preview. So there's a lot of changes. Just I think it was last month. Devin did a webinar on Power BI, and then later that afternoon they actually released an update for it. So I mean they're doing a lot of updates to the product right now. So I would definitely think that you're going to see wider DAX support in there in the future for things like calculated columns inside of your data model that it creates. So again, currently right now, just calculated measures, but I would look to see calculated columns in there in the future as well. So a little bit of a nice update that they came out with today. So you can create measures. Something that just Power BI in general right now, again, as I said, it is still in preview, so keep that in mind. But the piece that really seems to be missing from Power BI right now, and that they're obviously moving towards with the DAX, is just the Power Pivot piece in general. So you'll run through there, you'll create some Power Query to work with Power Query to bring in some data, but then from there, really the only piece of Power Pivot that we have available to us at this point is that limited DAX capability for calculations, and then we can create relationships between the different fields inside of our tables that we bring into the model. So very limited Power Pivot support. Again, I would definitely expect to see that, especially coming here over the summer, based on some of the things I've seen on the support page out there, that you would see a lot more Power Pivot type functionality out there. So a little bit of a miss on that piece. The other thing that we don't have is Power Maps. So there's no Power Map support currently. It's, again, something else that I would expect to see them kind of roll into this Power BI designer. It really feels like that's kind of the direction that they're going with Power BI in the future, is that they want to push everything through this designer so it's one unified experience for everybody there. So for the most part, I would say that almost everything is in there for Power Query. If you were to go use Power Query today, probably 95% of the functionality for Power Query is actually inside the Power BI designer. So they've taken basically the basis, getting our data out of our data sources and bringing it into our model. They've got that pretty much all in there. I think the next logical step for them is to start building in some of the Power Pivot functionality, and we're already seeing that with that DAX support that came today.
Yeah, and I think one of those features you mentioned, Power Query, is 95% there. One of the pieces that's not there is the shared queries. That's just not built in yet. You'll probably see that added over time. Kind of follow-up question here for you, Brad, that relates to a question that's in the chat window. This is from David. He says, do you see Excel continuing to be the user tool for Power Query, Power Pivot, and Power View, or do you see Microsoft moving towards the Power BI Designer tool as the primary user tool?
Yeah, I kind of feel like, like I said, I feel like they're really pushing everything to that Power BI Designer. I definitely don't see them eliminating Excel from the picture, just because of the fact that Excel is so widely used. I feel like they kind of alienate some of their user base. They're going to take a lot of people, a lot of those BA kind of people, out of their comfort zone if they force them into a different tool. I think that's one of the beauties of just Power Pivot, Power View, Power Query, all that stuff right now is it's integrated right into an environment that everybody's very familiar with already, so they can continue to use that same environment there. So I would definitely expect to see a lot of the functionality come maybe to the preview first and then get rolled into Excel. Yeah. But I would think that they're going to still stick around with both of those, just bring the feature parity up between the two tools.
Yeah, that's kind of I think you're right. That's the beauty of the designer, is you can quickly release new things to the designer that's not so connected to Excel. You have Power Pivot updates in the designer that you can't get into Excel very frequently because it's now baked into Excel. And a big piece of the designer is it doesn't require the licensing that Excel does for Power BI. So there's no Professional Plus licensing you'd have to have, which is a big plus.
I mean, the other side of that too is you don't even have to have Excel.
Yeah.
You don't even have to have Excel. I mean, I can't tell you how often I go to a customer site still, and you see there's some random person over there that's running Office 2007 still, but most of the people are actually running Office 2010, so you don't get the advantage of some of these newer features and that they're updating inside of Excel 2013 there. So it's nice for them to be able to pull those updates and that functionality out of the tool and get it out to the users a little bit faster.
I'd have to say, I actually ran into someone with Excel 97 last week.
Did you really? Wow. Oh, wow. That's impressive. And I'm sure some people on the phone call are like, that's normal.
They're probably running Windows XP also.
Yeah, they probably have to be. Okay, so sorry, presenters, I'm going to do a little bit of a tangent here. We've had actually more questions in the chat than I expected. So by the way, I did pull up the support page that Brad mentioned here. So if you see that here, that's if you go to PowerBI.com, you'll select support. You'll see the page he mentioned. You can see what's coming, what's planned, that sort of thing. And you can make suggestions here. I'm going to do a little pivot, though, as far as the presentation here. We've got quite a few really good questions. We only have 10 minutes left. We are doing just a 30-minute session here. But I would like to ask some of these questions that have come through. So I'm going to kind of pepper you guys with questions. Anthony, I'll hit you up with this next one. It's a Power Query question. Question is, does Power Query interface with FTP solutions like FileZilla? What about Google Docs? I think you kind of have a positive and a negative there, but go ahead.
Yeah, so this is a tough question. I saw this come through the list, and my gut reaction is interfacing with FTP solutions like FileZilla. I don't know that that's available today. Correct me if I'm wrong, guys, if you've had any experience trying to design a solution for that.
Yeah,
and then as far as the Google Docs solution, I also do not know specifically for sure on this one, but my gut would say that we could probably figure out a solution that works for that.
Yeah, I think you're right. So the FTP, I have not been able to get to work. The Google Docs, I've actually interfaced with a couple like Excel workbooks that have been stored on Google Docs, and it connects just fine with it. It almost sees it as just a regular workbook, I should say. So yeah, if you have data in like an Excel spreadsheet in Google Docs, it'll pick it up just fine. That was a question from Steve.
That's right. Actually, the online search piece that reminds me through Power Query. Some of the index sources actually came through and actually picked up some Google Docs for financials, so I have seen that work, yeah.
I'll go ahead and take this next one here. So there's next one here is a question about predictive analytics. And Anthony, you can jump in as well. I know you've done some work on this, but is there any tool or through Power BI where we can do predictive analytics? So that was Verandra. I'm sorry if I don't say your name right. Yes, so there is. There's some tools that allow you to do predictive analytics that Microsoft supports. One of the older tools that they still support is Analysis Services. Multidimensional has predictive analytics through data mining in it. And then the hotter flavor of that is Azure ML. So Azure ML is a cloud-based service for doing predictive analytics, and allows you to be able to pass in data and do all the traditional like decision tree, linear regression, all that stuff's built into Azure ML. Anthony, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, so I guess the way I would expand is through Azure Machine Learning specifically. It exposes a web service, an API call that I've been successful in getting to work through Power Query. The other option is within Azure Machine Learning directly through the experiment that you create, you can actually output that data to an Azure SQL database, all sorts of different data stores, which then could be consumed through Power Pivot or Power Query as well.
Great. So here's two questions from Gary. I'm not sure if it's the same Gary. It actually is the same Gary. Two questions from Gary about SharePoint Online. Brad happens to be one of our best SharePoint guys. He is our best SharePoint guy. So first question for you, Brad, here around SharePoint is what SharePoint Online plan is required to deploy Power BI solutions connected to SQL Server data sources?
So I looked it up in just to use Power BI in general. It's not really data source specific here, but just to use Power BI in general in Office 365, it says that it requires a SharePoint Online Plan 2. So I believe that actually correlates to an Enterprise E3 SharePoint Online subscription there that you have to have. So SharePoint Online Enterprise E3 subscription would be the answer to that one there.
Yeah, E3 or E4, Brad. Yeah.
You said E3 or E4?
E3, okay.
Yeah. Okay, good. And then the default other question Gary had here as well relating to SharePoint is what happens about Power BI data models when deployed to SharePoint? Are tables converted to lists? Are relationships converted to lookups? Can you kind of answer that there for Gary?
Sure. So the other half of that there is, like Gary is asking, what happens when I deploy this? So we have this kind of self-contained item that we end up deploying out to SharePoint Online. It's kind of the same story when we deploy out to PowerBI.com now in the new designer, as well as just deploying out to regular SharePoint, really. So there's no additional lists or anything like that are going to get created. It's actually going to be, you just upload the Excel file like you normally would to regular SharePoint into the Power BI site there, and it actually keeps all that stuff self-contained for you. So there's no new list or anything like that has to be created or anything along those lines. Just upload the file and still just the management of that file. With the Power BI designer and just PowerBI.com, you can build additional reports once you actually do the deployment. You can build additional reports off of anything that you've already deployed out there, though. So you're not limited to just what's inside of the actual report that you deployed out there. You can leverage that data model to create additional reports once it's been deployed.
Cool. So next one here, I'll go ahead and grab, is from Iman. He asked for everyday users in a large corporation that are trying to create ad hoc reports and analyze data. What would be better to introduce them to? The Power BI Designer, Excel Power Query, or both? I would say it really depends on what they're already using now. What are they already comfortable with? If they're already heavy Excel users, already heavily vested in Excel, I would probably do Power Query through Excel, as you suggested in the middle there. The Power BI Designer, first of all, just remember the Power BI Designer is still in preview, so there are some features that may be missing. But if you're already very vested in Excel and they already have like Professional Plus licensing, then I would continue to have them go down the path of Excel. Now, if they don't have Professional Plus licensing for Office, then you might send them down the Power BI Designer. If they're not already big, heavy Excel users, then you might want them to. Aman has a follow-up here. He says they're currently using Impromptu in Excel. So yeah, if they're not as big Excel users, then you might go ahead and send them down the Power BI Designer route, because that way they're going to be able to get the newest things that come and are released through the Designer, and they don't have to have the licensing be an issue as well. So Power BI Designer is pretty slick. It is still missing some features. As far as Power Query goes, it should have just about everything you need. I think we gave the one exception being shared queries, but and online search is not there either. But outside of that, it's a very comparable tool there. All right, next question here. No problem. Next question here is from Jason. I'll let one of you guys grab it. So Jason asks, our users use our software via remote desktop where we host the database. How can we get them to use Power BI with that setup? And kind of question is about logistics and licensing. So maybe let's take it this way. Let's start with licensing. Anthony or Brad, can you answer any kind of questions about licensing for Power BI?
Sure. So from a licensing perspective, I think you're probably talking about really the portals and collaboration part of Power BI, and really your options there are SharePoint on-premise, the SharePoint online through Office 365 and the Power BI sites, or the new Power BI preview. And all three of those different collaboration and portal options have different licensing implications. So obviously with a SharePoint on-premise installation, you got to think about SharePoint licensing. With SharePoint Online, you got your own licensing there. And then with the new Power BI preview, what we're talking about is either the freemium version or the paid version, depending on the features and functionality that are required.
Yeah, and I pulled up that last one you just mentioned, the more freemium model. You can see on the screen here. This is a pretty cool deal from what it is now. But correct me if I'm wrong, it's like $40 a person for current Power BI with Office 365, just for the Power BI piece.
That's what it was. So you're right. So it used to be about $40. I think they've, since the announcement of the Power BI preview, they've lowered that. I think it's now around $18 or $20 per user per month, but still significantly higher.
Yeah, and don't let us fool, and we will definitely admit to not being licensing and Microsoft experts for pricing. Don't let us be your sales guy. Always ask the Microsoft sales rep, what kind of agreements you have and deals that you would be able to get that could be different from what they list on the website. But for the new upcoming Power BI, as Anthony mentioned, it's going to be $10 for the Pro license, which allows you to do pretty much anything you want. There are still some limitations for like data capacity, which you can see here. But there's also a free model, which I kind of see this as more the viewer person, somebody that would come in and view what the pro person designed. Okay, so his other part of the question was about logistics. Yeah, it kind of, for Jason, for the logistics part of the question, it would really kind of depend on which of those three routes you go, whether you're doing Office 365 or whether you're doing traditional SharePoint. If you're doing more traditional SharePoint with like Power Pivot and Power View, then it's more of an on-prem solution that you have servers, either at a data center or local on-site for you, or it could even be IaaS. It could be in Azure for SharePoint. But there's I guess what I'm trying to say is I'm afraid that's like a much deeper question. We can certainly go more specific into that portion of it, unless you have anything to add there.
No, I mean the only thing I would add to that is really just, I know you mentioned that you have users use remote desktop to get to the software a lot, but the main piece of it that you would need to have somebody remote desktop into to actually do is build the data model. Once you have the data model built, you can really get that deployed out. And then from that, it really just becomes a web experience in a lot of ways to create the reports inside Power BI there. So, it kind of depends on the user, the use case for that user as well. Devin had mentioned there that the free model for PowerBI.com, the new PowerBI.com, is more that report viewer type person. It kind of has that same aspect with the development side there. The person that's just viewing it, they may not even need to go remote desktop just to view reports, whereas the developers, it's kind of going to depend on how far that particular developer needs to go, whether they've got to actually create the model or whether they're just going to be creating the actual Power BI report. Depends on whether or not they need to remote desktop into an Excel environment or not.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so let's do, we're basically out of time already. Maybe we should have extended this to an hour. We probably could have filled it. Unfortunately, I think we have some meetings after here, but let me do some quick hits here. One here is, any idea when IntelliSense-like functionality and automatic formatting for code will be available for DAX and M? It is already available for DAX. I should say IntelliSense anyways is. Color formatting obviously is not. M, for the M query language, is the Power Query language. I've heard a lot of talk about it. I don't have any particular data I can provide to you, but I know there's been a lot of talk of adding that functionality in there. Just no data I can provide. I would assume that will come, though. I would be very excited when M is no longer case sensitive. That's a really frustrating piece about it.
Hey, Devin, just to add on to that, for enhanced, I guess, DAX IntelliSense functionality, they're going to want to take a look at the DAX editor solution out on CodePlex as well.
Yeah, great point. And I should mention as well, thank you for saying that, because that reminded me that Matt Mason also has a Power Query editor for the query itself, where it'll do color formatting and things like that. If you search for Matt Mason, he actually works for Microsoft. He's on the Power Query team. He has a Notepad++ extension that will allow you to paste in Power Query and see the color formatting with it. No IntelliSense, but at least it gives you something there. Let's take this last one here, and I'll toss it up for anybody. It's a beginner question. This is from Jerome. SSIS has source and destinations. I only see Power Query with sources. Besides there in Excel, where else can you output the data that you transform in Power Query? Does Power BI Designer factor into this? So I guess the question is, SSIS, you can send data basically anywhere you want. With Power BI, either Designer or Excel, what kind of destination options do you have? Anybody want to take that?
Sure, I'll take it. That's certainly a big difference between SSIS and Power Query, where SSIS is more of an enterprise ETL tool. I hesitate to call Power Query an ETL tool because it doesn't really have that loading capabilities. It can load to either an Excel table or the Excel data model, which is Power Pivot. So that's the way it is today. Should that change in the future, I would expect it to give you more options for destinations, but that's where the product exists today.
Cool. Well, thank you, guys. These were some really good questions. I'm glad you guys were so interactive in the chat here. There was only a couple we weren't able to answer. We'll try and follow those up via the blog. Looks like most of them, we only missed like one or two. But we're running out of time. Well, if we do this again, you guys let us know in the feedback, either in the chat or however, if you like this kind of format. This is something different we're trying out, more of this panel discussion forum. And the response here has been actually greater than I thought. I thought I had to have a bunch of pre-canned questions, and I only got to about half of them. So if you guys have any follow-ups, you're welcome to put that in the chat. But hope you guys enjoyed this. I know it's a little shorter session. Obviously, we've realized here that we could do an hour of questions and be able to fill time. But we appreciate you guys joining us. And if you have any other questions, feel free to put them in the chat. Thanks a lot, guys.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Thanks.